MIT Technology Review, and you are meant to be here for a discussion about why publishers hate apps. This was suggested by an article I wrote a year and a half ago now about our very unhappy experiences creating native apps for MIT Technology Review. I don't want to just simply revisit my article. You can read it online if you wish. But what I thought would be helpful for both publishers and advertising executives, agencies and the like, is to have a discussion about what HTML5 actually is and what it can do for you, what native apps are and what they can do for you, what hybrid experiments look like, and perhaps also give you a sketch about what the publishing industry is doing right now, what the actual state of the art is. The bad news is that no one knows what's happening, and HTML5 is absolutely an unfinished piece of work. So I've invited to begin the conversation Chris Perry, who is the Chief Technology Officer at VentureBeat. He's going to be the technical guy. I'm going to be the abstracted guy who runs the business. We're just going to take you through both the tech side and then the business side. And then because this is a fairly small room, I thought it would be most helpful if we just had a conversation. And we can talk about what works and what doesn't work and about your experiences as well. Because we've actually got no time at all. We've just got 45 minutes. So with that, I'm going to step down, and Chris is going to tell you about what a work in progress HTML5 really is.
Cheers. So I put together a set of slides, and just a few, so we not get too far into it, aside from the fact that we're now at the end of the slides, but that's all right. So what is HTML5? HTML5 right now is a bullet point that most people see on their presentations. No one really knows what it is. That's because it really isn't anything. There's not a single HTML5 protocol or code set or standard like that. HTML5 really is just a combination of a lot of things. And one of the questions I get from a lot of people is like, well, how do I know if I'm seeing an HTML5 website? So if you go to a new website, open it in Internet Explorer. Did it break? It's probably HTML5. That's your best bet. Chrome, Firefox, if it works, it's probably HTML5. But HTML5 is really this collection of different technologies and solutions that have been evolving over the last couple years to solve the interactive problem we have on the web. The initial solution was using things like Flash or Java, but installed plugins have big limitations. So what people like Microsoft and Mozilla have been trying to do is say, can we address this interactivity and more dynamic presentation by just using Java? And thus, we have all these different things. We have Web SQL, we have Canvas, which lets you do 3D on the web. We have audio codecs, we have video player codecs. And they're all different little pieces of the solution that are trying to solve this interactivity problem. And we're taking this whole big bucket of different solutions, and we're calling it HTML5. Now, we can really get into the deep technical details of it, but I don't think this is the right audience for it. If you have further questions about, some of the new tags or how it's being implemented and where the state is, we can talk afterwards or maybe during the Q&A, depending. But the most important thing is it is not done. Not everyone has 100% of what we are calling HTML5 implemented. So saying that you have an HTML5 site really doesn't say anything. You may be 50%, 80% compliant. And then we're already starting to draft 5.1. So it's a continuous work in progress, which make you think, well, maybe I shouldn't use HTML5 at all. Maybe I should be using mobile. Done? Yes, that's the handover.
So I'm going to tell you a story about our experiences with HTML5. And then I'm going to give you a bit of data as well. Okay. There we go. Why can't I do this? There we go. So when Apple released the iPad in April of 2010, just 4 months after Steve Jobs first announced his magical and revolutionary new machines, traditional publishers were already kind of gripped by a sort of collective delusion. And they had convinced themselves that tablet computers and mobile devices like the iPhone would allow them to unwind their unhappy experiences with the internet. For traditional publishers who hadn't grown out of the internet, like publishers unlike VentureBeat, the web had been an extraordinarily unhappy experience. It taught readers that they could basically read content without charge, and it offered advertisers ways to advertise more efficiently, and both parties spent less. Smartphones and mobile devices seemed to promise a return to simpler days, the way we used to do business and publishing. Now, it's true that there had never been a single reader who had ever embraced what's called the digital replica of a publication with any pleasure at all. But traditional publishers told themselves a story. They said that people didn't like digital replicas because the user experience was so bad. But they thought that if they developed truly native applications on mobile devices, the devices would be so cool, and you could suitably enhance the digital replicas with all sorts of snazzy features like videos and interactives, that readers would embrace them with enormous pleasure. The scheme was tremendously alluring to people like me. Because publishers thought they'd once again be delivering a discrete product pushed to users, they thought they could charge readers for single copy sales or subscriptions once again. And software vendors like Adobe, I hope is there an Adobe representative in the room? No, well, they lied to us by telling us that they could simply and seamlessly translate the content we were already producing for websites and for our print editions to these new native applications. The only difficult part was software development, but we had all these geeks, we thought, right? We had all these nerds working on websites, and how difficult could native application actually be? The other attraction to doing native applications was that we thought we could revive the old print advertising economy. And this is because of a single thing, the Audit Bureau of Circulations, called ABC, which is the industry standard for measuring magazine and newspaper circulations, said that we could count the readers of native applications towards what's called our rate base, the traditional measure of your reach. Essentially, publishers lost their heads. Everyone rushed into the marketplace to create native applications either on the iOS platform from Apple or Google's Android platform. And here's the personal part of the story. I succumbed myself, at least a little. I never believed that native apps would allow the industry to roll back its unhappy history with the web, but I thought that at least some readers would delight in a beautifully designed version of MIT Technology Review on a native app. So beginning in January of 2011, we poured a huge amount of money into native app development. And complimenting myself on my conservatism, I said that I would only anticipate $125,000 in additional incremental revenue in that first year. And that meant less than 5,000 subscriptions. What could possibly go wrong? Everything went wrong, essentially. So let me briefly run down all the things that went wrong. For a start, at least on the iOS platforms, Apple demanded a 30% vigorish, a 30% cut on every transaction. That may be the case in the iTunes or App Store, but as a publisher, we're not used to giving away 30% of our revenues, if only because our margins are so vanishingly small as it is. At one step, Apple essentially made the business non-profitable. Then, even though ABC said they would count these native apps against our rate base, Apple refused to provide us with the data from the downloads in a way that satisfied ABC requirements. So it didn't do us any good at an advertising level either. Finally, and this will astonish the techies in the room, it turned out that app development wasn't as easy as we all thought. That iOS apps, for instance, were in fact written in a language called Objective-C, which none of our internal development staff knew how to do, and were real, if small, applications running directly on an operating system. And finally, the user experience was simply unfriendly. Users had been trained over 15 years of web use to treasure the linkiness of the web. And these native applications we were developing were sealed gardens, were walled gardens, and were dissatisfying for that reason. We spent a lot of money on this. For readers, the frustration overcame the novelty. In the end, I spent around $300,000, $400,000 of entirely unbudgeted additional revenues to build things that I got 200 subscribers for. 200. No advertising at all. So the beginning of this year, essentially, we completely abandoned native applications and are driving towards this as yet unfinished standard of HTML5, or at least an HTML5 native app hybrid, which we can talk a bit about as well. Let me tell you what's happening now with our peers in the publishing world. So there is an extraordinary explosion of a variety of consumption patterns amongst users. The biggest by far is amongst mobile platforms. In 2011, mobile use increased proportionally by 58.8%, and in 2012 by 51%. Everything else increased as well except for print, which, as you can see, continues to collapse. Publishers themselves say they are increasingly focused on mobile content. If any of you want this data, you can write to me afterwards at jpontin, P-O-N-T-I-N, at mit.edu, and I'll send it to you. 90% of survey respondents in a digital publishing survey said that they expected to they already had mobile content. The remaining 10% so they began to distributing mobile optimized content in the next 12 months. So in 2013, 100% of publishers say they will have some kind of mobile strategy. For the first time since we began conducting this kind of survey in 2009, publishers are developing more apps for the iPad than the iPhone. So the iPad is beginning to become the preferred device for development. Publishers are also producing apps for many platforms. So despite the difficulties and the confusions of multiple platform development, everyone basically feels that they must gamble and develop with the iPad, the iPhone, Kindle, Nook, BlackBerry, and other OS. This is in some ways the principal attraction, the principal motivation driving HTML5 development. You can't develop native code for all those applications. So to have a common open standard that you can develop for is one of the major reasons why HTML5, despite its unfinished status, is still so exciting to so many people. Publishers, however, remain split on the native versus web app debate. Despite that souring of early excitement about what the native world could do, publishers are basically split down the middle between developing native and web apps. There's a difference, though, inside the industry. Publishers are not all made the same. Magazine publishers show a strong desire to stick with the native app format, around 58%, whereas newspaper and business publications are still undecided by 60%, with a slightly higher margin for native. Publishers also are beginning to charge for mobile content across all their platforms, whether it's mobile, iPads, iPhones, and Kindles. This is one of the questions people were asking: could we charge for content on devices? And the truth seems to be that though readers, users are immovably opposed to paying for content by and large on PCs, if you give them the same content on a mobile device, they're willing to go and spend some money on it. More publishers believe in the importance of generating dual revenues from both advertising and from consumers on mobile platforms. In 2009, just half thought that revenue would be coming from both sources. Last year, more than three-quarters believed that they'd be receiving revenue from both. And publishers are anticipating a growth in mobile advertising revenues. This may be a delusion. The advertising executives, both on the agency and the client side and the audience, know that there is as yet no established set of units in the way that IAB has formalized for the web for mobile platforms. And yet publishers think that there will be an explosion of mobile advertising in the near future. I have the same graph there twice, forgive me. And finally, many publishers' digital platforms are already profitable, which is interesting, and they expect the profitability to continue to grow through the end of 2014. 62% of publishers are offering readers access to content on all print and digital platforms for one price, while 47% have differentiated pricing across their platforms. So I'm going to go through what some of the best cases, the most innovative companies in the web are doing. But again, if you want any of that data, just email me at jponton@mit.edu and I'll send it to you. So there are a number of examples, I think, of publishers who have enough money to be experimental and innovative. A site that I think is doing some extremely interesting work with HTML5 is the New York Times. They launched an experimental HTML5 web app to sidestep that Apple 30% fee at the end of last year. It's a new online publication. It doesn't look like a website. It's very beautiful. And some of the Times' interesting work in interactive formats, like that stunning snowfall interactive they did about an avalanche last year, was specifically designed as content for this new platform. The New York Times has been tremendously successful in its digital strategy. They have managed to generate 670,000 paying digital subs across web, app, and this new HTML5 web app, and half of their revenues in Q4 of last year derived from consumers. That's totally new. For people who have been in the publishing industry for a while, that is extraordinary. Traditionally, the New York Times circulation was run as a loss leader in order to defer some of the costs of audience development in order to sell classified ads and display advertising in print. For the New York Times to essentially be a genuinely reader-facing company as a business is a tremendous change. And for those of us who are wondering whether or not journalism, quality journalism, is sustainable, is very encouraging news. The Atlantic, under a guy called Justin Smith, who is their new president, formerly the president of The Week here in the United States, and formerly before that the American president of The Economist. Under Justin Smith, The Atlantic is doing really interesting work. They claim to be profitable as a business. That may in fact not be a lie if you include all the events businesses they do. They too have an HTML5 app which they launched at the beginning of this year. Traffic to the AtlanticWire.com is up to 3.3, and the Atlantic amazingly has 10.3 million unique visitors. Digital revenue is up by 52%. What they're not doing at the Atlantic at the moment, at least, is trying to generate revenue very much from consumers. The only consumer business they have is their events business, which is wildly profitable, and their print magazine. And then finally, the gold standard at the moment for HTML5 application is the extraordinary team at the Financial Times, which has had a variety of iPad-focused web apps over the last year and a half. They launched the most recent one just last month. It is gorgeous. If you haven't used it yet, I urge you to go and see it. What we'll be talking about in a few moments, what you can and cannot do. If you have 120 developers to throw at the problem, you can see that with the FT. They have a lot of money. The things they're doing probably aren't replicable for many of us, but it is really exciting to see what you can do if you have all the money in the world. And on that note, I'm to fall silent, and we'd love to have a conversation about your experiences. We'll answer any technical questions, at least Chris will, and I'll talk about what I know with the business side.
Yeah, just use the microphone.
Use the mic. Say who you are, please, and where you're from, because we're taping everything.
My name is Michael Singer, and I'm with Tab Times. We focus
Why don't you come over here?
Yeah.
Two questions for the panel. First is, despite your best efforts on native apps and working with HTML5 and looking at that user experience, I want to get your feedback on the aggregates applications like Clipboard and Zeit, who are basically siphoning off of those experiences. And secondly, what do you feel would be the tipping point for smaller, less, publishers with shallower pockets, shall we say, than Financial Times, to help them? Because as the Economist CEO Rashdash often says, it's leaving that 2.0 experience, that they are experiencing that need to do it on tablet as opposed to anywhere else. So what do you think about aggregate sites, and how is this tipping point for smaller firms?
Why don't you talk about them as technical platforms first, and then I'll say a bit about
All
what
right.
they do for my business.
All right. Well, I'll take the second question first. I think that's more interesting. You look at New York Times, you look at FT and all that. If you have unlimited resources, you can do amazing things in HTML5. And theoretically, if you have unlimited resources, you can just create an app for each particular platform and hone in on a perfect experience. If you have very few dollars, you have to start making some compromises. And your compromise has to be not necessarily what kind of technology you want to use or not use, as much as where is your revenue stream relative to consumer experience. So if your revenue stream is completely focused around advertising, you need to generate as many page views as you can. Therefore, you want to ensure that you are across as many devices as you can, you're as compliant as possible, you're not trying to do anything so fancy that you're going to lock up a device, you're going to lose a reader. If instead you have a more narrow niche, you may want to take your limited resources and focus on where you think a majority of your readers are and create a well-designed HTML5 or hybrid app to satisfy their requirements of either it's a paywall or advertisement. And it sounds easy, me just saying this, but when you actually sit down and have to make these decisions, they're amazingly difficult. But the reason I'm making that distinction is HTML5 is not a panacea. You don't just sit down and crank out HTML5 code. The more sophisticated your site is, or the more complicated the visual experience is, the more headaches you are going to have with HTML5. Almost to the point where if you do something really gorgeous and really interactive and really amazing, you're probably going to spend less money developing a native app. So,
Really?
Oh God, yeah. Oh, I mean, if the problem with HTML5 is the amount of JavaScript threads and the amount of memory you're going to use, the amount of CPU you're going to take up to do these beautiful swipes and make sure everything's running 60 frames per second and making sure your touch sensor is exactly right when you drag. It's a beautiful, fluid experience. That's pushing your device using a JavaScript engine.
And you said something else to me earlier, that you needed really good coders not to go and build out those features as complete memory hogs.
Right, right. I mean, you are completely at, and this goes back to the limited funds problem, you have to have really good coders who really understand thread management, memory management, and everything else to achieve this beautiful experience if you want to do an HTML5. If you don't have the money for really great programmers, simplify your design. Don't simplify it such that you lose your readers, but for, please, to save yourself and everyone else headaches, try to have a clean, simple, easy site, because you're just going to have a bad time. It takes way more money than you think.
Since we're being filmed, of course, my coders are the greatest in the industry, but by and large, publishers can't compete with, in terms of pay, with the pay that a first-class developer can afford. Can be paid either at Google or Facebook or at a startup. We work with the best we can find, and I think it's fair to say that either developing for multiple platforms or doing a really first-rate HTML5 app is often beyond the abilities of what we as publishers can afford. Let me ask you a question about the aggregators. What do I think about them? It's the height of fecklessness in some ways to wish the world were other than it was. Disaggregation has already occurred. So I tend not to fret about the rise of another generation of aggregators like Flipboard and the like. We receive our revenues really from 4 sources. We have a free website that we derive advertising revenue from. We have a variety of subscription products, both digital and in print. We license our content to other publishers around the world, and we do events. Everything which I do that invests in the quality of the content and the reader experience pays me back. And I trust that if people experience a bit of that on an aggregator, if they click through, that my bounce will be sufficiently low that I can draw them back as more permanent members of the technology review community. I don't worry about the aggregators. In fact, I think of them as the top of the funnel, to use the advertising of the jargon of the advertising industry, which sends potential more permanent members of my community to be part of me. But I know that other publishers fret about the aggregators all the time. Other questions?
Hi, I'm Brad Behrens. I'm the host here at AdTech. And I have a sort of two-pronged question.
Yes.
Actually, I have about a dozen questions, but I'm only going to ask this two-pronged one. The first is I was hoping, Chris, you would dig down a little bit more on what hybrid apps are, what the advantages and disadvantages of them are for the folks in the room. And then I wanted to ask the two of you to connect what you're talking about with HTML5 on the publisher side to how to work with your advertising partners.
Oh boy.
And whether this is there's always the joy and the oi with these kinds of things, and what opportunities and challenges HTML5 presents for that kind of work, which is, as Jason was saying, so key to monetization.
The joy and the oi. I am
Joy
so
and the
going to
oi.
steal that. That's
I'm
beautiful.
definitely going to steal that.
I'm stealing that. I will credit you. No, not really.
What are hybrid apps?
What are hybrid apps? A hybrid app is basically taking a iOS or Android shell and running your HTML5 content within the shell. The advantage of this is it lets you put your app in the App Store without having to go through all the massive programming to create all this stuff through using native code. And there's a lot of great advantages to this because if the content is being loaded after the app is deployed, right now, Apple will not ding you for that 30%. Right now, the 30% markup that Apple wants basically kills it for publishers. When I first was starting to build an app, I started thinking about that, and I abandoned it immediately. but I still do have a shell app running out there. The advantage of the shell app is you can offload a lot of the simple UI things, like a menu pull down, or storing something into memory, or creating a button or something like that. You can make native calls for that. And that is much more energy efficient, much more CPU efficient, and it's a much more pleasant and much more native experience for your user. And in the actual content itself, you can just deliver with HTML5. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. If you've never done anything with hybrids before, I recommend looking to PhoneGap. It's actually a very nice, very mature platform for doing delivery, but there's tons of things out there. The always part. So when you start going down the hybrid road, you are a bit of a slave. Unless you're writing your own framework, you are a slave to whoever you go with. So if you go with PhoneGap, you have kind of bought into their system, you're a slave to their system. I still think that given that we don't have a lot of great choices and great answers, it's still a good middle solution if you're not sure if you should be doing native or HTML5. And there was a second part of that question.
So I guess the question is, how do we work with the agencies, and how are they regarding our commitments to HTML5 or native apps? Let me just say at first that agencies are in many ways the most conservative places in the world, technically. I mean, generally speaking, agencies aren't filled with techies. The only part of HTML5 that I've seen agencies embrace wholeheartedly at this point is the local storage feature, which they've done some interesting things with. But having said that, I feel a lot of pressure from the agency world to embrace the open standards of HTML, because they'd prefer me as a publisher to do that than to do some of the complicated cross-platform things that I might otherwise do, because they have the same pressures I'm under. Not a huge number of in-house developers or freelancers they work with. They too want a common set of standards to work with. And what they really don't want me to do is responsive design. Everyone in the room knows what responsive design is?
Yes.
Who doesn't? So he can say he doesn't.
We'll have a private conversation on that one.
So advertisers don't like responsive design because it essentially breaks the IAB ads. Get it down small enough and the ad breaks altogether. But more than that, they can't guarantee their client where the ad's going to appear, which is a thing that almost every single client wants to be able to guarantee. So for the agencies, when they see me making a choice between a responsive design, an HTML5 choice that might potentially be write once, run anywhere, or a multiplicity of platforms, they want me going down the HTML5 route.
Yeah, and I want to comment on that a little bit. I expect a whole bunch of hate mail and hate looks at this. For the love of God, do not build a single responsive design site that's going to go across your mobile phone or your desktop. I will hunt you down, really. I will. It's ridiculous. The mobile phone is not the desktop. Your mobile phone experience is so unique and so different from desktop experience. You need to be delivering your content targeted towards that experience. There was a study done, and I don't remember who did it, but the amount of time that you spend on this device is relative to the size of the display. The smaller the display is, the smaller your actual session is. So I could have a 30-second session on this device, and I may have a 2-minute session on a desktop just by the nature of the change of the screen real estate, because the way you think about and interact with this content and this display is different. I take my phone out, and I have no expectations than interacting more than maybe 30 seconds with anything. And then it's back in my pocket again. Where I'm sitting down on my desktop, I am much more willing to stop, reflect, and engage with my content than I'm going to be on this. So why in the world would you try to design for me one particular set that's going to be completely different to your user base? And also think about the same problem with your delivering your ad set. The ads and the media that's ad, whether it's a flash or whatever, on the desktop, that's going to attract clicks or interactions completely different than is going on this thing. It makes absolutely no sense to expect your users to respond and act to an ad on this the same way they respond and act to an ad on a desktop. You mentally got to break it.
If you don't believe me, my wife is the editor of the Boston Globe magazine, which is probably the best example of a big publisher who embraced responsive design. Everyone hates it, from on the editorial side and on the ad sales side. So she'll convince you.
Yeah.
Please.
I had so many comments and suggestions, I had trouble coming up with a question, but here's one. Why did you consider, or why did you take the option of developing it yourself instead of finding a starving startup or some generic solution? To me, it seems analogous to building your own printing press or making your own paper. And it seems like you're in the business of producing great content, and the application is a completely different business.
It's a good question. I agree with the basic insight that publishers should only do the things that are core to delivering value to their customers, for us readers and our advertisers. But we decided that those core skill sets in the end did include the user experience. So there's a ton of stuff that we don't do. I haven't got into the tech stack, but you go down below the presentation layer and there's tons of stuff we don't do, from obviously things like ad serving, from analytics. But we did decide that we wanted to be in control of, I guess, three things. We wanted to be in control of content, we wanted to be in control of design, both art and the top level of the user experience, and the slightly deeper level of the way a reader moved through our site. We felt that we were the best judges of that. So there was an earlier question about working with small startups. We're owned by a university, but we don't have a gigantic development staff. There are about 5 developers at Technology Review. It's all they can do to keep up, but we do want to remain in control of the presentation layer. I think it's the same adventure.
Yeah, it's the same. In fact, I had a little starving firm build me my first iOS app, and then they disappeared. Yeah. Apparently, they weren't starving anymore. Yeah. So you kind of have to think about it as how risk averse you are. And we're somewhat risk averse. So once you start handing other people the responsibility of maintaining any of your code base, if something happens with that third-party entity, you're lost. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure you have control of your core bits. I mean, there's a lot of third-party plugins and things that I'm running on my stack that came from other sets. And if that fails or something, I have fallbacks to that. But this actually goes to your point. We are very concerned about the quality of our writing, and we want to make sure that through the user experience that comes out. And SEO concerns and display concerns are becoming more and more dependent on good technology. So if you do not have good control over the base technology that's presenting your information, then you've already compromised that presentation.
But to your general point, God, yes, publishers should outsource everything they can. But by and large, to big reputed vendors who aren't going to go away, or to open systems like Drupal that are fairly well established now. But for us, the user experience is a thing we care a lot about.
Yeah. You can actually manage these third parties as long as you have someone inside who is very astute about what's going on. And if something happens with that third party, they can pivot quickly and replace them.
Say who you are.
My name's Chuck Lenati. I'm working for ID Alliance these days. 3 years into the tablets after the iPad and so forth, what's your perception now of the perceived value of tablet advertising by both advertisers, brands, and by consumers? And do you ever think that you're going to get the kind of revenues from tablet advertising that you're able to get from, print? Obviously was a big moneymaker for branded advertising. And also, what do you think about brands themselves? I'm thinking about Red Bull with Red Bulletin doing their own apps and serving their own niches.
The short answer to that is I don't think we know what the units for mobile advertising look like yet, either on the phone or the tablet. We do know that conventional display advertising on digital platforms as a whole, whether it's PC-based or mobile, is doing very badly. And we know that agencies have been absolutely unable to sell their clients on those little tiny mobile ads, the little bar that sits across the river of news. I showed you a data point where publishers believe that mobile advertising is going to be tremendously important, successful, but so far they've been disappointed. I can tell you what I think has worked so far. Video is working very nicely on mobile platforms if the agency and the client are willing to invest real production dollars in it. And then this word that we're beginning to throw around, sometimes people call it native, sometimes people call it sponsored, but advertising that doesn't seem like advertising to people who really care about it. You know, there's a joke that it's only advertising if you hate it, otherwise it's a communication from a brand which you love. So really intelligently well thought out native advertising that provides information that's useful, interesting, I think is very powerful on mobile platforms. For the ad people in the audience, I'll give two examples that I think are amazingly beautiful. There's an affluent hipster jean company, showing my preferences here, from Sweden called Nudie Jeans, that does the most beautiful advertising you can imagine. I believe out of in Great Britain, really beautiful ads, particularly on native platforms. It's advertising, but you can see they're genuinely proud of their product. They really understand their audience, and they're trying to provide useful information. It's a really exciting ad. On the B2B side, the best example I know at the moment of sponsored advertising that's still advertising but is both inspiring and interesting and useful is the IBM Smarter Planet campaign. It's really good. I mean, there are very few ad campaigns where, as a jaded journalist, I will want to read it, but I read the Smarter Planet campaign, and it's fascinating. They have stories about how they rebuilt the favelas in Rio de Janeiro in a way to go and preserve the indigenous culture and yet bring clean water, transportation. It's really interesting stuff. And they do it with a mixture of voices from the mayor, from the people living in the favelas, from the IBM executives who worked on the project. That's what good advertising should be. It should tell a story, it should be about people, it should advertise the products and the services, but it should do in a way that is actually entwined intelligently with a narrative. So those are my two best examples of great native advertising at the moment. Nudie Jeans for consumers and Smarter Planet from IBM. Only one of them is an advertiser for me.
Full disclosure.
Yeah. Any other questions? We got 2 minutes.
We got 2 minutes. 1 minute, 51 seconds. Thoughts, rants, raves?
I'll ask another.
Yeah.
Google Glass and the next generation of display technology, which right now people are thinking is mostly glorified GPS, but how will it affect publishing?
I have a strong opinion on this. Do you want to
No, I want to hear the strong opinion bit.
So how many people have worn Google Glass? So I have done so as well. I wore it first time at TED. It is a weird device. It is in no way what it looks like. So you've seen the videos which Sergey and his boys have put together, which makes it look, this seamless experience. It's not like that at all. For a start, one side is significantly kind of weightier. Two, the audio thing buzzes into the bone behind your ear, so it's speaking into the middle of your head. It's not this kind of floating heads-up display as if you were a fighter pilot. The hands of your own F-22. It's this strange little blinking light up here, and it's really, far from being unintrusive, it's simultaneously both really intrusive and not intrusive. It doesn't work at all. What I think might work, though, is making digital a device that we're all used to glancing at, the watch. So I could imagine carrying around my little mainframe computer, my iPhone in my pocket, and having a simple interface on my wrist that just showed me a couple of things I was interested in. I think that socially makes much more sense as well, right? if you've ever seen Sergey use his damn device, he's constantly hitting at the side to start the thing off, and then muttering to himself like a crazy person.
He did that before Google Glass.
Well, he did that before. It looks really strange, I think. He talks about the iPhone in a weird misogynistic way. He talks about the iPhone as being emasculating, and therefore the iPhone will be a somehow more masculizing experience for him to. I don't think it's going to work, but I think a device that I could glance at on my wrist might make a lot of sense, and publishers could work with that as well. There could be news updates. You could have some forms of advertising you had elected to see. That might work. So there's the Pebble, which works on that model altogether, and it's a relatively open secret in Cupertino that Apple is working on a smartwatch as well.
Yeah, my opinion on the glass is the same thing. I wore it and I was like,
That's weird.
turning to the left. I think there's still a future for it.
Yeah.
It just needs some more refinement. And I ordered the Pebble.
You did?
I'm waiting for mine to come in.
I think Google Glass will absolutely exist in certain verticals where it makes sense. You could use it for driving.
Yes.
Soldiers might want it. You know,
Well, and as a soldier, who actually, I was in the Air Force, and one of the devices I actually maintained was the heads-up display for one of our jets. And so I am very familiar with what a heads-up display is and how it works.
one of our jets or one of their jets?
I had one RAF jet and I had a US jet, so I had both. And no offense, but that RAF jet drove me nuts.
Okay. Listen, guys, you've been very patient. As I say, I'll send you the data if it's interesting to you. In the meantime, a warm hand for Chris Perry of VentureBeat.
Cheers.
And I'm Jason Potter.
Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.